You know, the story of India's independence, it's often told like this single heroic struggle against the British Empire. But the real story? Oh, it's way more complex and honestly, a lot more interesting. It's about how this massive subcontinent, with all its different people and languages, tried to come together and speak with one voice to demand freedom. So, let's dive into how that incredible and incredibly messy journey actually got started.
I mean, just look at this picture. The sheer number of people is staggering. This wasn't just another protest. It was something new, a new kind of consciousness being born. For the very first time, the shared experience of being under colonial rule was creating this powerful bond, weaving together all these different groups into a new shared Indian identity.
And that, right there, is the big question we're tackling. Because sure, the goal was freedom, but what did that word actually mean? What would freedom look like for a peasant versus a factory worker versus a wealthy merchant? They weren't always the same thing. So how do you build one movement out of so many different dreams?
Okay, so into this really charged atmosphere steps a person who is about to change everything. When Mahatma Gandhi gets back to India in 1915, he doesn't just bring political experience. He brings his radical new idea, a whole new philosophy for fighting back against injustice. He called it satyagraha. He called it satyagraha, which literally means truth force. Now, this wasn't about being passive, not at all. The core idea was actually pretty revolutionary. If your cause is truly just, and if you stick to the truth, you can confront your oppressor without ever using violence. The goal was to appeal directly to their conscience, to force them to see the injustice of what they were doing. As Gandhi himself said, this was pure soul force. He totally flipped the script on what resistance meant. In his mind, nonviolence wasn't a tool for the weak. No, it was a display of incredible strength, of real courage. It was an active struggle, and its power came from truth itself.
And boy, was this idea about to get its first big test on a national scale. You see, after all the sacrifices of World War I, instead of getting some relief, Indians were hit with even harsher, more repressive laws from the British. The stage was set for a massive showdown.
The breaking point was something called the Rote Act. Just try to wrap your head around this. A law that let the government throw anyone in jail for up to 2 years without even a trial. All they needed was a suspicion that you were involved in political activities. This was a direct attack on basic human rights, and it sparked absolute outrage across the country.
And then came the moment that changed everything. At a place called Jallianwala Bagh, British troops blocked the only way out of a walled garden and just opened fire on a peaceful, unarmed crowd. Hundreds were killed in cold blood. This one act of sheer brutality sent a shockwave of horror across the entire nation. For so many, that was it. That was the point of no return. Any little bit of faith left in British justice was just gone.
So in response, Gandhi proposed this breathtakingly simple yet incredibly powerful strategy: non-cooperation. His logic was solid. British rule in India only worked because Indians cooperated with it. To bring Hindus and Muslims together on this, he also supported the Khilafat cause, which was a protest against how the Ottoman Caliph was being treated. The plan was clear. If Indians just refused to play along by boycotting British schools, courts, and foreign goods, the whole colonial system would grind to a halt.
But as this massive nationwide movement started rolling, a huge crack began to show. The one word everyone was rallying behind was Swaraj, which means self-rule. The problem? That one word meant very, very different things to different people.
You gotta understand, Swaraj wasn't some abstract political theory for millions of people. It was the answer to their immediate, everyday suffering. It was like this big empty vessel that people poured all their different hopes and dreams into.
And these dreams were worlds apart. For the educated middle class in the cities, yeah, Swaraj meant political control. But for a peasant out in the countryside, it meant an end to backbreaking rents. For tribal communities, it meant getting back their rights to the forests they depended on to live. And for a worker on a tea plantation in Assam, Swaraj was something as simple and as desperate as the freedom to just go home. The word was the same, but the meaning was shaped by their specific struggle.
But this whole phase of the movement just stops, dead in its tracks in 1922. After a protest at a place called Chauri Chowra turned violent, Gandhi, who was an absolute purist about nonviolence, called the whole thing off. He just felt the country wasn't ready for a truly nonviolent struggle yet.
So after a few years of things being relatively quiet, Gandhi once again found a way to unite the nation. And he did it with something so simple, so everyday, that everyone, and I mean everyone, could understand it.
Salt.
And this was just pure genius. See, the British government had a total monopoly on making salt, and they taxed it heavily. This meant that every single Indian, no matter how poor, had to pay the British for something they needed just to live. So by marching 240 miles to the sea to make his own salt, Gandhi created this perfect, powerful symbol of defiance. It was an injustice that everybody, rich or poor, immediately understood.
The Salt March kicked off what became the civil disobedience movement, and the country just exploded. People everywhere started making their own salt, boycotting foreign clothes, refusing to pay taxes. The British response was a massive crackdown. We're talking over 100,000 people arrested, including Gandhi himself. But here's the thing. Even at the peak of this incredible national protest, those deep divisions we saw earlier, they didn't just magically disappear. In fact, the pressure of the movement actually made them stand out even more, showing the real limits of this newfound unity. Let's look at the countryside, for example. You had rich farmers who wanted lower taxes, but then you had poor tenant farmers who wanted to stop paying rent to their landlords entirely. The Indian National Congress was caught in the middle. If they supported the no-rent campaigns, they might lose the support of the wealthy peasants and landlords, who they also needed. It was a classic case of class interests pulling the movement in different directions. And then there was another huge fracture, this one around the issue of caste. For centuries, the so-called untouchables, who started calling themselves Dalits or the oppressed, had faced just awful discrimination. Their leader, the brilliant Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, argued that for them, freedom meant getting real political power of their own. And this is where two giants, Ambedkar and Gandhi, really clashed. Ambedkar demanded something called separate electorates, which would guarantee that Dalits could elect their own leaders. But Gandhi was terrified this would shatter Hindu society forever, permanently separating them. He actually fasted almost to death to oppose it. A compromise was reached, but that deep disagreement and distrust, it didn't go away. And finally, on top of all that, there was the growing divide between Hindus and Muslims. After the non-cooperation movement ended, the relationship really soured. The Congress started to seem like it was getting closer to Hindu nationalist groups, which made a lot of Muslim leaders really nervous. They started to fear that in a future independent India, their culture, their religion, and their political voice would just be drowned out by the huge Hindu majority.
So when you step back and look at it all, what you're really seeing isn't one single movement. It's a constant, difficult, messy negotiation. It was an incredible attempt to build a nation out of all this diversity, where the needs of one group sometimes clashed directly with the needs of another. What was really emerging was a nation with many, many voices.
And that leaves us with a really powerful question, one that's still relevant today. This whole struggle for freedom was also a struggle to define what India itself would be. And those debates, those divisions from that time, over class, caste, religion, they didn't just vanish when the British left. So how does a nation continue to navigate the very same fractures that were there right from its birth?